Attorney General Holder, welcome. Before I start, General, you and I are both lawyers. You're the top lawyer in America, according to what we address you of. You're the #1 lawyer in the federal system, and I was just a poor little small town district judge. But we both have been involved in seeking evidence from witnesses, and I'm sure you already realize there's a whole lot of difference between whether we seek evidence here and the way we would have an opportunity to seek evidence in the courtroom. Because, quite honestly, answer one question, the witness can go into a soliloquy and there'll never be another question to ask. So I'm going to ask you a long question with a series of questions contained therein, which would probably be objectionable in a court of law, but unfortunately that's the way it works here. So I just wanted to point that out to you. I've got questions about Fort Hood. If you were listening or watching, you saw that the reporters were continually asking, when will the FBI be here? We heard a report from Dallas that FBI agents were on the way. I'm sure there were FBI agents on the way from Austin. So the FBI was coming, is what it was on. Some were here. It was the next press conference. In the this recent shooting, who, in your opinion, will take the lead in the investigation of the 2014 shooting? The FBI or the CID? When will that decision be made as to which one will do that? And who makes that call? You, the SecDef, the President? How was that decision made in 2009, in 2009? Who makes that call? Were DOJ and its resources pulled from the first Fort Hood shooting based upon a political decision to classify that shooting as workforce violence? Who made the call to treat the 2009 shooting as a workplace violence as opposed to an act of terror? Being a fine lawyer, I'm sure you're very familiar, since you're fighting our terrorism in this country, with the definition of terrorism under 18 U.S.C. 2331, 2332 A and B. Did the DOJ discuss with the DOD the classification of the event in 2009 as to whether or not it was going to be an act of terrorism? It seems implausible that two of our top agencies would not have a conversation about that. I know that ultimately you made a statement that this was a DOD classification. I'm asking you, though, as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States, would you classify the 2009 Fort Hood shooting as a terrorist act or terrorism as defined in 18 U.S.C.? Had the 2009 Fort Hood shooting occurred at DOJ headquarters and therefore fully under your jurisdiction, would you have categorized that as a workplace violence event? And finally, how have jurisdictional lines between the FBI, CID, and other law enforcement agencies been defined when criminal acts are taking place on a military post? And in light of the recent base shootings, should we clarify investigating these responsibilities?
Well, with regard
Lots of questions. Sorry.
The White House confirmed, I guess, on Wednesday night that the Department of Defense was in the lead with regard to the investigation. It doesn't mean, however, that the FBI will not try to assist in any way that we can with regard to for our forensic capabilities, agents. We will assist in that regard. With regard to that workplace violence designation, that was based on a DOD assessment. I understand your concerns, but I would refer you to the Department of Defense for questions. And I think, interestingly, Chairman Wolf and Ranking Member Fattah appropriately raised these questions back with DOD in a May 2013 letter, which acknowledged, and I quote, that the Department of Defense and Army have designated the attack by Major Nidal Hassan as, quote, workplace violence. It was something that determination was made by DOD as opposed to DOJ.
Would you mind answering my question that I asked you? Had it happened at your headquarters, how would you have classified it?
Well, I mean, again, you'd have to look at the totality of, the circumstances and understand.
Well, for the sake of the question, assume the exact scenario that happened at Fort Hood in 2009. You have a person of Islamic descent screaming Allah Akbar. He was a member of your staff, and he starts shooting, and he wounds some 30 people and kills 13 or 14 of them. would you still take that as a position that it was a workforce violence act and therefore not under our terrorism statutes?
Well, again, it would depend, these are fact-specific things. And so, it would depend on what the person's motivation was. Was the person a follower of Alaki, as Hassan was? Was the motive for the shooting an attempt to follow the teachings of Alaki, as opposed to some kind of workplace problems that you had with your colleagues? Yeah, I could see how that would be classified as a terrorist incident if it had happened at the Justice Department. But again, it depends on the facts situation, and I don't know all the factors that went into the DOD designation. That was not one that we made. It was one that they made. I'm not familiar with all that they did.
I agree with you. Facts are important. That's why finding out about facts are important. But I just happen to have a copy of the code here. You don't have to be involved with the Islamic situation at all to commit terrorism in the United States, do you?
No.
No, it's not. It's a defined statutory thing. It's pretty simple. Involves acts dangerous to human life that violate federal or state law, appear intended to, 1, intimidate or coerce a civilian population, 2, influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or 3, to affect the conduct of government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. Doesn't say anything about a relationship with. Now, international terrorism does have a definition of somebody outside the country being involved. But I just first asked you, would you consider it a terrorist act if it happened in your office?
Again, I don't know, I'm not as familiar with what happened at Fort Hood the first time as the people at DOD were, and I'm a little hesitant to, in essence, second-guess the assessment that they made.
I'm not asking you to second-guess their assessment. I'm concerned, if you're the top enforcement officer for the United States of America, and there's a clear definition in the U.S. Code, and it's expanded. I didn't read all of it. But that's a clear definition of the U.S. Code. And if somebody started shooting people in your office, multiple people screaming out some kind of political comment, I don't care what it is, would you have automatically said, well, this unfortunately is a civil workforce violence problem we've got here?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I mean, it certainly could be a terrorist act. It would depend, again, on the facts. And those are the kinds of determinations that we would have to make.
And the truth is, if it happened, it really wouldn't be of any consequences as it related to your office, because the term workforce violence has consequences under the DOJ, but it doesn't have consequences. And terrorism, the term terrorism has consequences, DOD. Both those terms, what it's called, has major consequences on the lives of those involved. And that's the real issue I have been concerned about since day one. A simple declaration by the administration or the Army, public or private, that says it is a workforce violence act takes 24 people and puts them in a category where they don't get certain benefits from the federal government as a result of them serving their country and being shot and killed or injured. That's why I'm asking this question. Because I think we ought to at least acknowledge that there's a clear definition under federal law. And by the way, Texas has one under state law that says, I think clearly that the act was terrorism. Whether international or not is up for dispute. The act was terrorism. And so that's why I ask you for your help. I understand you don't want to answer the question, and that's fine. But I ask you for your help. I think I probably used my time.
If the judge would just yield for a minute.
If I have any time to yield.
I've joined with you in your legislative effort in this regard, and I agree that clearly this was a terrorist act. I think the point is that it was determined, the first determination was made by the Department of Defense. As the Congress, we can change that, and we should. And because as was the case on people who lost their lives on 9/11 or at the Pentagon, this was an act by the statement of the perpetrator himself.
That's right.
So there's no ambiguity.
And I agree, Mr.
Nothing-
Fattah. I'm looking
nothing
for
vague about it.
reinforcement from the top lawyer of the United States. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Judge Carter. And following up on what Judge Carter said, I agree with him. And you were here last year. In fact, as I remember, you stayed around and you spoke to some of the individuals. Boy, they've really gone through a tough time. I just saw an article today, and I listened to it going home last night. Kimberly Munley was shot 3 times, taking down Nidal Hassan. Then she got laid off. Yet she never stopped fighting for the victims of military betrayed in that shooting. And I think what Judge Carter's saying, I mean, your relationship with the president, probably you have a better relationship with the president than most of the cabinet members. Well, you do. I mean, you do. There's nothing. You're not. Denying it. You do. Why don't you take this back? It was not workplace violence. The people have been hurt. They still contact my office. Some of them. One of the women has moved to Northern Virginia area. Also, our government is partially responsible, and I think what Judge Carter is saying is the Bureau missed some of it. There were communications from Malakwe to the major. I spoke to a psychiatrist down at Fort Hood who said that Malakwe was telling returnees from Afghanistan that they should basically say that they were war criminals. And so the government missed it. And so if I would ask you on behalf of Judge Carter, if you would take it back, I think we can't change what took place in 2009. I mean, we wish we could. It's kind of like when you see something, you say, oh, if only. But I think you could go a long way to healing this. And so and we did do a letter, and we're not banking, we're not going to dock you $1 million for this letter, but we sent a letter on March 15, 2013, signed by Mr. McCall, Mr. Carter, and myself, with a lot of questions on this, and we never got an answer. I would ask you on behalf of Judge Carter, but more so, and I think Dr. Carter, Judge Carter, on behalf of those who were wounded and the loved ones who lost, would you go back and speak with the President to ask, and also Secretary Hagel, who lives out in my congressional district, that they would look to redo this in such a way now, because the case is over, whereby these individuals who were wounded and the family members could be treated in a much more appropriate way. Could you take that up with the President?
All right. Well, I will.
It's a general question, sir. I'm not asking you to specific of what we're going to call it. Just we have to close this chapter. We have to do it for the people. And, it says in the Bible, do unto others. Jesus says, do unto others as you have them do unto you. This is purely, if you and I were in that circumstance, we would feel this sense of injustice. And I think what Dr. Carter, Judge Carter is trying to do is to represent them. And I think you would have the ability, I'm not asking you to define it, what it would be called, but to see what could be done to heal this wound. And if you could just say, I'll look at it, I'll talk to the President and get back, you can go back to Dr. Carter. But it would enhance your credibility as you leave this department. It would be the right thing to do. And now that there has been a conviction, all the arguments that have been answered before, so if you would do that, I would appreciate it.
All right, what I'll do, again, this was a DOD assessment, and so I think it's more appropriate for me to talk to Secretary Hagel,
Okay.
and I'll do that.
Okay. Would you tell him his member of Congress asked you to do it too? Then?
Oh, I'll indicate to him exactly why.
I think he infers he votes for me too, so if he would do that, I would appreciate it.